For as long as human beings have walked the earth, one question has lingered like a shadow across every generation. What truly happens when life comes to an end? This question is not confined to religion or philosophy alone. It touches science, psychology, culture, and even personal identity. We build our lives around beginnings and endings, birth, growth, decline, and death. But the final step of this cycle remains cloaked in mystery. Unlike birth, which we can witness, or aging, which we can feel, death is the unknown. No one can return with certainty to describe what lies beyond it. And so, throughout history, people have filled that silence with stories, with myths, with theories that try to bridge the gap between the seen and the unseen. Today, in an age defined by science and technology, that same question has not disappeared. If anything, it has grown sharper. We can scan brains, manipulate genes, extend lifespans. And yet, when the heartbeat stops and the neurons cease firing, we still do not know what becomes of consciousness. Is it extinguished like a flame, or does it move elsewhere? Does it dissolve into nothing, or awaken in a reality we cannot yet perceive? It is here that science and imagination meet. While religions speak of souls, heaven, or reincarnation, modern physics introduces ideas just as strange. Parallel universes, quantum entanglement, the possibility of infinite realities existing side by side. Could it be that death is not an end, but a transfer? Could consciousness, in some form we do not yet understand, continue its journey into another universe entirely? This possibility gives birth to a new idea: quantum reincarnation. The awareness of mortality is arguably the most defining feature of human consciousness. Animals may fear threats, but only humans appear to understand, in a conceptual sense, that one day they will cease to exist. This awareness has shaped every civilization. Burial rituals dating back tens of thousands of years suggest that even early humans believed something remained after the body was gone. Grave goods, painted caves, and ancient symbols all point to the idea that death was not final, but a passage. Across the world, cultures began to weave intricate narratives about what lay beyond that passage. In ancient Egypt, the dead were equipped with treasures, food, and instructions to navigate the afterlife. In Greece, the souls of the departed were thought to cross the river Styx into Hades. In Norse mythology, warriors hoped to reach Valhalla, a hall where eternal feasts awaited them. In each case, death was not perceived as the end of experience, but as a continuation of existence in a different form. Yet there was another strand of thought, emerging particularly in the East, that offered a more cyclical interpretation. Rather than envisioning a linear journey to a final destination, Indian and Tibetan traditions imagined life and death as repeating patterns in an endless cycle of rebirth. The idea of reincarnation suggested that the essence of a person, their soul or consciousness, was not destroyed with the body. Instead, it moved on, inhabiting another vessel, beginning another life. This cycle, called samsara, was both a burden and a possibility. To some, it was a curse of endless repetition. To others, it was a path toward eventual liberation and enlightenment. The persistence of reincarnation myths points to something deep within the human psyche, an unwillingness to accept finality. To imagine nothingness, true non-existence, is nearly impossible. Our minds are structured to anticipate continuity, to expect a tomorrow. When that expectation collides with the certainty of death, humans instinctively build bridges of belief to carry the self across that terrifying gap. What is fascinating is how these myths evolve, yet remain connected by a thread of longing. In every culture, the human being resists the idea that death is the end, whether by imagining heavens, underworlds, cycles of rebirth, or reunions with ancestors. People return again and again to the conviction that something survives. These stories are not mere superstitions. They are psychological anchors against despair, ways of making life meaningful under the looming shadow of mortality. Even in philosophy, the problem of death has been central. Thinkers from Plato to Heidegger wrestled with the paradox of human finitude. Plato believed in the immortality of the soul, arguing that death was simply the separation of soul from body. The Stoics emphasized accepting death as natural, but still implied that consciousness was part of a larger cosmic order. In the modern era, existentialists like Sartre and Camus rejected comforting illusions, confronting death as absolute. Yet even they acknowledged that the awareness of death shapes the way we live. It forces us to create meaning. The oldest question, then, is not simply what happens after death. It is also, what does life mean in the face of death? Theories of reincarnation, immortality, or afterlives are not just speculations about the unseen. They are responses to the unbearable idea of finality. To ask about what happens after death is, in some sense, to ask about the nature of existence itself. Today, this question takes on new dimensions. With science advancing at unprecedented speed, the boundaries of life and death are shifting. Medical technology allows us to resuscitate those who would once have been considered gone. Near-death experiences, once dismissed, are now studied with serious neurological inquiry. And in physics, the discovery of quantum phenomena challenges our very understanding of reality. If particles can exist in multiple states at once, if observation itself determines outcomes, what does that say about consciousness? And if the universe is not singular but many, then perhaps the oldest question, what happens when we die, must be rephrased. It is no longer simply, do we survive? It becomes, where do we awaken? The universality of the question makes it enduring. Whether through myth, religion, philosophy, or science, humans will not stop searching for answers. Death confronts us all, but so does curiosity. This curiosity is not satisfied by silence. It drives us to build stories, theories, and now perhaps scientific models that attempt to illuminate the darkness beyond life's final moment. As we move deeper into this exploration, the traditional views of reincarnation will meet the strange landscapes of quantum physics. What was once framed as spiritual speculation may, in an unexpected way, overlap with modern interpretations of reality. If the soul exists, perhaps it is not a mystical essence, but something woven into the very fabric of the universe. If rebirth occurs, perhaps it does not unfold within a single world, but across countless worlds that lie just beyond our perception. The oldest question has not changed. What happens after death? But the possible answers are evolving, expanding, and in some ways becoming stranger than the myths of the past. Among the many visions of what lies beyond death, reincarnation stands as one of the most enduring. Unlike ideas of a singular afterlife, reincarnation presents a cycle, a repeating rhythm in which the soul, or consciousness, takes on new forms again and again. What makes this concept remarkable is not only its longevity, but also its appearance across diverse civilizations, often separated by oceans and centuries. Though expressed in different ways, these traditions share a core assumption that something essential about a person does not vanish with death. Instead, it continues, carrying forward into a new existence. In Hindu thought, reincarnation is not simply a mystical belief, but a framework that shapes the entire philosophy of life. The cycle, known as samsara, is both vast and deeply personal. Each individual's actions, known as karma, weave together to determine the conditions of their next birth. To live ethically, to pursue knowledge, to honor duties, these choices ripple forward, influencing the journey of the soul. Liberation from this cycle, called moksha, is not achieved through chance, but through spiritual progress. For Hindus, reincarnation is not just about survival after death. It is about the possibility of growth across lifetimes, of moving closer to unity with the divine. Buddhism, which emerged from the same cultural soil, carried forward the idea of rebirth, but gave it a distinct interpretation. In Buddhist teachings, what travels from one life to another is not a permanent soul, but a stream of consciousness, shaped by cause and effect. Life is compared to a flame passed from one candle to another. Not identical, not entirely different, but connected by continuity. This perspective emphasizes impermanence, showing that clinging to the self is an illusion. The goal is not to perpetuate rebirth forever, but to escape it entirely, achieving nirvana, a release from the wheel of suffering. Beyond India, echoes of reincarnation appear in other ancient traditions. Greek philosophers like Pythagoras and Plato spoke of the transmigration of souls, suggesting that learning and virtue might extend across multiple lives. In Celtic culture, warriors believed that death was merely a doorway, with the soul ready to enter new forms without end. Even among some indigenous peoples of North America, stories circulated of spirits returning in the bodies of descendants, binding family lines together through cycles of rebirth. What ties these beliefs together is a shared resistance to the notion of annihilation. In each case, consciousness, or some essence of it, is imagined as durable, able to endure the breakdown of the body. The metaphor of cycles dominates, seasons turning, seeds sprouting after decay, the sun rising after setting. These natural patterns provided models for human destiny. If rivers flow endlessly to the sea and return as rain, why should life itself not return in new forms? The classical idea of reincarnation also speaks to human justice. In many traditions, the cycle is not random, but morally structured. Actions in one life have consequences in the next. This belief offered comfort to those who suffered, suggesting that pain was not meaningless, but part of a longer story. At the same time, it encouraged responsibility. Choices mattered, not only for this life, but for countless futures. Even today, this aspect resonates, hinting at a universe where morality is woven into the very fabric of existence. It is striking how these ancient visions anticipated questions that science now struggles to answer. If memory and identity are tied to the body, how could anything survive its destruction? And yet, if consciousness is more than physical processes, could it exist independently, moving from form to form as reincarnation proposes? While the ancients spoke in spiritual terms, they laid the groundwork for debates that continue today. Reincarnation, in its classical sense, was not meant to be metaphorical. It was a lived belief, influencing daily choices, social structures, and rituals. Families in India might perform ceremonies to honor the soul's journey. In Tibet, lamas searched for reincarnations of spiritual leaders, believing that wisdom could return in new bodies. These practices gave tangible weight to the idea, treating rebirth not as speculation, but as reality. What stands out when examining these traditions is how naturally they integrated the continuity of consciousness into their worldview. They did not struggle to explain how the soul might survive. They assumed it did, and then built intricate systems to describe how it moved, transformed, and learned. In a sense, these cultures provided one of humanity's earliest attempts to create a map of existence, one that extended beyond the limits of a single lifetime. From a modern perspective, these classical beliefs may seem unprovable, yet they reveal something profound, a conviction that consciousness is not bound strictly to matter. This conviction opens the door for new interpretations. If consciousness does not end with death, where does it go? If the cycle of rebirth is real, what mechanism carries it forward? Ancient answers were spiritual. Today, as we turn to physics and quantum theory, we begin to ask whether science itself may one day provide a framework to explain what once belonged only to religion. The classical idea of reincarnation, then, is not a relic of the past. It remains a foundation for how billions of people interpret life and death. More importantly, it sets the stage for new explorations. When combined with the strange counterintuitive findings of quantum mechanics, reincarnation may be reframed not only as a spiritual belief, but as a scientific possibility. The thought that we may awaken in new universes after death is not so distant from the ancient conviction that life continues in new forms. The difference lies in the language. What was once soul may now be described as information, energy, or quantum state. The timeless power of reincarnation lies in its promise of continuity. It tells us that endings are not absolute, that existence is larger than the span of a single life. By tracing its classical roots, we see how deeply embedded this intuition is in human culture, and we also see how ready the human mind is to consider the possibility that death may not be final, that consciousness may flow onward in ways we are only beginning to imagine. Reincarnation, as it has been understood for centuries, describes a cycle within this world. A person dies, and their consciousness or soul returns in another body, continuing a journey across lifetimes. But what if that idea is only the surface of something far more expansive? The radical possibility suggested by modern physics is that reincarnation might not be restricted to Earth, or even to this universe at all. Instead of returning here, consciousness may awaken in entirely different realities, branching into dimensions that coexist alongside our own. This is the quantum twist, the idea that what survives death does not merely pass into another body, but into another universe. To understand this shift, we first need to look at how physics has reshaped our understanding of existence. For most of human history, the universe was thought to be singular and stable. Reality was the stage upon which life unfolded, fixed and unchanging in its basic structure. Then, in the early 20th century, quantum mechanics shattered that picture. At the subatomic level, particles do not behave like solid, predictable objects. They exist as probabilities, as overlapping possibilities that only resolve into definite outcomes when measured. This strange behavior revealed that reality is not as solid as it seems, but fluid, dynamic, and profoundly uncertain. One interpretation of quantum mechanics, known as the many worlds interpretation, takes this uncertainty to its logical conclusion. Rather than assuming that only one outcome becomes real, it proposes that every possible outcome actually occurs, each in its own universe. If a particle can spin up or down, then in one universe it spins up and in another it spins down. If you make a choice, then both paths unfold, one in your world, another in a parallel world. In this vision, the cosmos is not a single unfolding story, but an infinite branching tree of realities. This brings us back to death. If consciousness is tied to the quantum fabric of reality, then perhaps its continuity does not depend on remaining in this particular universe. When the body fails and the brain shuts down, the conscious observer might simply shift to another branch, another universe where life continues. In that scenario, death is never experienced from the inside. To the observer, awareness flows seamlessly into the next possible outcome in which they still exist. This means reincarnation could be reinterpreted not as a return to Earth, but as a migration through the vast multiverse. Consider what this implies. Each time someone dies, their subjective experience might carry on elsewhere into a parallel reality where they survive the accident, recover from the illness, or simply continue along an alternate path. From the outside, others see a body cease to function, but from the inside, consciousness never stops. It transitions without break into a version of reality where existence persists. In this framework, reincarnation is not limited to human birth or spiritual cycles. It is woven into the structure of the universe itself, operating through quantum probabilities. This idea also redefines what we mean by identity. Traditional reincarnation suggests that the soul remains intact as it moves between bodies. Quantum reincarnation suggests something different, that identity is a stream of consciousness navigating the landscape of possible universes. The self is not a fixed essence, but an ongoing perspective, carried across branching realities. You are not reborn into a stranger's body, but continue into the next version of reality that permits your awareness to exist. The boundaries of reincarnation expand from the cycle of life on Earth to the infinite branching paths of the cosmos. Skeptics might question whether this is simply wishful thinking dressed in scientific language, but the beauty of the quantum twist is that it arises not from superstition, but from the mathematics of physics itself. Quantum mechanics already demands that reality be stranger than our everyday intuition. It already insists that multiple outcomes exist simultaneously, that observation plays a central role in shaping what we perceive. Extending these ideas to consciousness and survival after death may sound radical, but it is consistent with the logic of the theory. If the universe branches infinitely, then there must be branches in which you continue. The fact that you are aware at all suggests you may always find yourself in one of them. This possibility does not diminish the spiritual traditions of reincarnation. On the contrary, it enriches them. The ancient belief that life continues aligns with the modern vision of a multiverse filled with endless potential. Instead of a mystical soul traveling through time, we see a quantum observer navigating probability. Instead of cycles tied to karma, we see awareness flowing through the structure of reality itself. Both perspectives point toward continuity, toward the refusal of consciousness to be extinguished. The difference lies in scope. What once belonged to myth may now extend to the stars. The quantum twist also forces us to reconsider the meaning of death itself. If reincarnation occurs through the multiverse, then death is not an endpoint, but a transition of perspective. From the inside, there may never be a moment when experience ceases. Each collapse of possibility leads to a new unfolding. Life in this view is not fragile but indestructible, because it is always carried forward into another reality. This is not immortality in the traditional sense. Bodies still age and die in every world, but it is survival, a continuity of awareness that spans universes. Of course, the quantum twist is not proven. It is a theory, a way of connecting the mysteries of consciousness with the mysteries of physics. Yet even as a possibility, it challenges us to expand our imagination. It suggests that the old question, what happens after death, may have an answer stranger and more profound than we ever expected. Not heaven, not reincarnation in the familiar sense, but a journey into new universes, new realities, new versions of life itself. And if this is true, then every death is also a beginning. Every ending is a doorway, not into nothingness, but into another world waiting to be lived. Every human being knows what it feels like to be conscious, yet no one can fully explain why it happens. You open your eyes in the morning, and the world is instantly there: colors, sounds, sensations, memories, emotions. This constant stream of experience feels so natural that we rarely stop to question it. But when science tries to define what consciousness actually is, it faces a puzzle so deep that some philosophers call it the hardest problem in existence. The brain, as biology describes it, is an organ made of cells firing electrical signals. Neurons communicate through chemical messengers, creating networks of activity that we can measure with scans and instruments. These processes correlate with thought, perception, and behavior. But here lies the mystery. Why should electrical impulses inside a brain produce subjective experience? Why should molecules interacting in a physical system generate the feeling of being alive, of having an inner world? This is the essence of the hard problem of consciousness, a phrase made famous by philosopher David Chalmers. Science can explain the functions of the brain, how it processes language, how it responds to light, how it controls movement, but it cannot explain why all this processing should be accompanied by awareness. A machine could, in theory, mimic the functions of the brain without ever producing the spark of experience. Yet humans do not just process information, they feel it. There is a profound difference between a camera detecting light and a person seeing a sunset. The camera records data, but the person experiences beauty. Where does that quality come from? Some scientists argue that consciousness is simply an illusion created by the brain. According to this view, the feeling of being aware is nothing more than a trick of information processing, a story the brain tells itself. But this explanation fails to satisfy, because even if awareness were an illusion, it is still an illusion that must be experienced. The fact that we can even discuss the existence of consciousness proves that something undeniable is taking place within us. Other thinkers propose that consciousness might not be a product of the brain at all, but a fundamental feature of reality. In this view, just as mass and charge are basic properties of matter, awareness itself could be a basic property of the universe. This perspective, known as panpsychism, suggests that consciousness is not something that suddenly emerges from complexity, but something that exists in some form at every level of reality. The human brain may not create awareness from nothing, but instead organize it, focus it, and shape it into the rich inner life we experience. This possibility connects back to quantum theory in surprising ways. Quantum mechanics shows us that observation plays a strange and essential role in determining how reality unfolds. At the smallest scales, particles exist in states of probability until measured. When observed, they collapse into definite outcomes. This dependence on observation raises a provocative question. Does consciousness itself influence the structure of reality? If so, then perhaps consciousness is not only fundamental, but also intertwined with the very laws of physics. Neuroscience has made great progress in mapping the brain's functions, yet it still cannot bridge the gap between firing neurons and lived experience. We know that damaging certain regions changes memory, vision, or emotion, but the leap from brain activity to subjective awareness remains unexplained. The brain appears to be a tool through which consciousness operates, but whether it generates or channels awareness is still unknown. This unresolved mystery matters deeply for the theory of quantum reincarnation. If consciousness was simply a byproduct of the brain, then it would vanish at death like the flame of a candle snuffed out. But if consciousness is fundamental, if it exists beyond the physical machinery of neurons, then death might not mark its end. Instead, consciousness might be free to shift, relocate, or reappear in another branch of the multiverse, carried along by the same quantum fabric that underlies reality itself. The hard problem reminds us that science is still in its infancy when it comes to explaining the mind. We can launch telescopes into space and split atoms in accelerators, yet the essence of awareness, the one thing we know most intimately, remains elusive. This does not mean it is beyond understanding, but it does suggest that our current framework is incomplete. Consciousness may require a new paradigm, one that unites physics, philosophy, and perhaps even the ancient intuitions of spiritual traditions. When we ask what consciousness really is, we are not just asking a scientific question. We are asking what it means to exist, to be a subject in a universe of objects. It is the one phenomenon we cannot escape, because everything we know is filtered through it. To study consciousness is to study the foundation of reality itself, and until we understand it, we cannot fully answer what happens after death, or whether awareness might continue beyond the body. The mystery of consciousness is not just an obstacle, it is an opening. It shows us that the story of existence is deeper than we currently realize, and it invites us to consider the possibility that consciousness, far from being fragile or temporary, may be the most enduring element of reality. When researchers began searching for a scientific explanation of consciousness that could go beyond the classical view of the brain as a purely biological machine, some turned their attention toward quantum physics. This field already challenged our understanding of reality with its counterintuitive principles: superposition, entanglement, and the strange dependence of outcomes on observation. The question arose naturally. What if the mind itself is not bound to classical physics at all? What if consciousness is, at its core, a quantum phenomenon? The quantum mind hypothesis suggests that awareness does not simply emerge from the brain's neural wiring, but instead depends on quantum processes taking place within it. At first glance, this idea might sound improbable. After all, the brain is a warm, wet, and noisy environment, not the kind of setting where fragile quantum states are expected to survive. Quantum coherence is usually associated with controlled laboratory conditions or extremely cold systems, yet some scientists began to propose that biological systems may be more adept at sustaining quantum effects than previously believed. One of the most famous approaches to this idea comes from physicist Roger Penrose and anesthesiologist Stuart Hameroff. They developed the theory known as orchestrated objective reduction, or OR. According to their model, the building blocks of cells known as microtubules, tiny tubular structures that form the scaffolding inside neurons, could act as quantum processors. These microtubules might maintain coherent quantum states that interact in ways beyond classical computation. In their view, consciousness arises not from simple firing of neurons, but from quantum collapses inside these microtubules, orchestrated across the brain in a unified pattern. Whether or not this specific theory is correct, it raises an intriguing point. If consciousness depends on quantum events, then awareness could be inherently non-local. Quantum phenomena such as entanglement allow particles to remain connected across vast distances, influencing each other instantaneously in ways that defy classical explanations. If the processes giving rise to consciousness operate on this level, then awareness might not be confined to the physical limits of the body. Instead, it could be woven into the larger quantum fabric of reality, capable of existing beyond ordinary spatial and temporal boundaries. This opens the door to the idea that consciousness might be eternal. Classical physics dictates that the brain eventually decays, and with it, the thoughts and memories it contains. But if the essence of awareness is quantum, it may not simply vanish at the moment of death. Quantum states, while they collapse in specific circumstances, are also conserved and redistributed across the universe. The information does not disappear, it transforms, shifting into new configurations. Consciousness, under this view, could follow a similar path, re-emerging in different forms, potentially in different universes. Another aspect that strengthens this possibility is the link between quantum mechanics and information theory. In physics, information is considered fundamental. The principle of conservation of information suggests that nothing is ever truly lost, even if transformed. If consciousness is a form of quantum information, it may persist beyond biological death, encoded into the underlying structure of reality. This would mean that what we call reincarnation is not merely a spiritual metaphor, but a quantum process of information migrating into new patterns of existence. Critics argue that such models are speculative and lack direct experimental evidence. Yet science has already found examples of quantum effects in biology. Birds, for instance, appear to navigate using quantum entanglement in proteins within their eyes, allowing them to sense Earth's magnetic field. Photosynthesis in plants relies on quantum coherence to efficiently transport energy. These discoveries demonstrate that life has evolved to harness quantum processes in surprising ways. If nature can exploit quantum mechanics for navigation and energy transfer, perhaps the brain has found a way to employ it for consciousness itself. The quantum mind hypothesis also provides an explanation for phenomena that classical neuroscience struggles to address. Experiences such as sudden insights, profound altered states, or near-death perceptions often feel as though they transcend the ordinary flow of time and space. If consciousness is entangled with deeper layers of reality, these experiences may represent glimpses of its non-local character. They would not be hallucinations or malfunctions, but rather brief moments when awareness stretches beyond its usual boundaries. Importantly, the quantum approach does not suggest that consciousness is immaterial or magical. Instead, it places awareness firmly within the physical universe, but within a deeper framework of physics than we currently use to describe the brain. It suggests that the mind is not just neurons firing, but a dynamic interplay between matter, energy, and quantum information. This perspective bridges the gap between subjective experience and objective science, offering a model in which consciousness is both real and scientifically accessible. If this hypothesis holds weight, then death might not be the end of consciousness, but rather a transition. The biological structures that support awareness break down, but the quantum processes that underlie it may continue, redistributing into other possible states of the multiverse. In this sense, reincarnation becomes less about metaphysical belief and more about the natural consequence of quantum continuity. Awareness could dissolve from one life and reconfigure in another, carried along by the currents of quantum reality. The quantum mind hypothesis remains controversial, but it provides a framework that is both scientifically grounded and profoundly transformative. It takes the hardest problem of consciousness and ties it to the most mysterious field in physics. By doing so, it offers a vision of the mind as more than a temporary flicker of neurons. It suggests that awareness is a fundamental part of the cosmos itself, entangled, enduring, and perhaps eternal. When the body begins shutting down, science describes the process with clinical precision. The heart slows, circulation weakens, oxygen levels drop, and neurons start to lose their ability to communicate. The electrical patterns that once carried thoughts, memories, and awareness begin to collapse. Eventually, measurable brain activity fades into silence. From a biological perspective, death is the termination of organized function. Yet even in this final act, mysteries remain. Some studies show that in the minutes surrounding clinical death, bursts of unexpected neural activity occur, surges that resemble heightened states of consciousness. What exactly is taking place in those fleeting moments? Are they the last sparks of a dying machine? Or are they glimpses of something more profound? Traditional biology frames death as the extinguishing of consciousness because the brain ceases to operate, but quantum theories raise a different possibility. What if awareness does not end with the body, but instead continues, carried through the very physics of reality itself? If the quantum mind hypothesis is even partially correct, then death may function less as a conclusion and more as a transfer. Consciousness could shift its state, moving out of the fragile biological vessel and into the deeper layers of existence. To imagine this transition, it helps to recall that quantum systems never simply vanish. Energy transforms, information is preserved. A wave function collapses into an outcome, but the probabilities that defined it are absorbed into the larger fabric of reality. If awareness is quantum in nature, then the death of the body might not destroy it. Instead, it could represent a shift into a new configuration. Just as energy disperses without being lost, consciousness could redistribute, no longer anchored to neurons, but continuing in ways our current instruments cannot track. Near-death experiences reported by countless individuals add an intriguing dimension to this discussion. People describe vivid perceptions, tunnels of light, life reviews, sensations of detachment from the body. Skeptics argue these are artifacts of a dying brain, but the consistency and depth of these experiences suggest they might reflect something more. From a quantum perspective, they could be moments where consciousness begins detaching from classical brain processes, moving toward a broader field of reality. These accounts, while not proof, resonate with the idea of death as transition rather than erasure. In many cultures, death has long been seen not as an end, but as a passage. Religious traditions speak of the soul moving on, of cycles of rebirth, or journeys into other realms. Quantum theories echo this ancient intuition, though in a different language. Instead of souls, they speak of quantum states. Instead of heaven or reincarnation in a literal sense, they describe shifts into alternate universes, the multiverse that physics suggests may exist alongside our own. In both frameworks, the underlying message is similar. Awareness is not destroyed. It transforms, it migrates, it continues. The idea of continuity is supported by one of physics' most fundamental principles, the conservation of information. While matter and energy change form, information encoded within them persists. Black hole physics once seemed to challenge this, but even there, modern theory suggests information is not lost. If consciousness is information at a quantum level, then it too must follow this rule. Death would not erase it, but reconfigure it, dispersing it into the quantum landscape of the cosmos. The biological breakdown we observe at death could be compared to a radio that stops functioning. The signal seems gone when the machine falls silent, but the broadcast continues to exist beyond it. The radio was a receiver, not the origin of the transmission. If the brain works in a similar way, shaping and channeling consciousness, rather than generating it in isolation, then its failure does not mean awareness is annihilated. Instead, it means the channel closes, and consciousness may find a new frequency, a new place to manifest. This perspective reframes death from something final into something transformative. The fear of nothingness is rooted in the assumption that consciousness depends entirely on the brain's machinery. But if consciousness is embedded in quantum reality, then nothingness may not exist in the way we imagine. Instead, there is continuity. The self we experience may dissolve, but the core of awareness flows forward, absorbed into new patterns, perhaps even waking into new worlds. This idea does not diminish the weight of death as a human experience. The loss of a body, of a life's unique memories and personality, is profound. Yet on a deeper level, death may be closer to stepping across a threshold than falling into void. It is the end of one configuration of consciousness and the emergence of another. And if quantum theory's implications are taken seriously, the transition might even be into entirely new universes, each branching from the infinite possibilities of the multiverse. To understand death as transition is to recognize that awareness is not as fragile as we assume. It may be woven into the very structure of reality, capable of moving through forms, evolving across boundaries, and persisting beyond physical decay. Biology records the shutting down of organs, but physics may reveal that consciousness itself is carried forward, transformed, not erased. In the middle of the 20th century, a bold interpretation of quantum mechanics emerged that forever changed how some physicists thought about reality. Hugh Everett proposed what is now known as the many worlds interpretation, an idea both elegant and unsettling. Instead of treating the collapse of a quantum wave function as a single outcome becoming real, Everett argued that all possible outcomes occur, but in separate, parallel universes. At every moment of quantum choice, the universe branches, creating countless new realities where each possibility is played out. This interpretation removes the need for a mysterious collapse triggered by observation. Instead, reality itself is a vast multiverse, a constantly dividing structure where every path is taken. In one world, a coin toss lands heads. In another, it lands tails. In one world, a decision is made to turn left. In another, right. The mathematics of quantum mechanics supports this view just as much as the traditional collapse interpretation, but the implications are staggering. If every possibility is realized somewhere, then existence is far more expansive than we can perceive. For the question of death and consciousness, the many worlds interpretation opens a radical possibility. If universes split at every quantum event, then there may always be a branch where the conditions align so that you survive. In one version of reality, the accident proves fatal. In another, it is narrowly avoided. In one version, the body succumbs to illness. In another, it recovers. From a purely external perspective, all these outcomes exist equally. But from the internal perspective of consciousness, could it be that awareness simply continues in the branch where survival occurs? This concept has been called quantum immortality, a thought experiment that stretches the logic of many worlds to its extreme. It suggests that because there will always be a branch in which the observer remains alive, consciousness may never experience death directly. Instead, awareness shifts into the surviving branches, following the path of continuity. To the external world, people die, but from the subjective viewpoint, there is always another version where life goes on, seamlessly, as if death had never occurred. Of course, this does not mean that life continues unchanged. Each new branch where consciousness persists may be subtly or drastically different. In one, the world appears identical to the previous moment. In another, circumstances diverge. Over countless transitions, one might awaken in realities that feel increasingly unfamiliar. Shaped by the cumulative shifts of branching events, the self is carried forward, but in an evolving landscape of possibility. Critics of quantum immortality argue that it cannot be tested or verified, making it more philosophy than science. Yet it remains consistent with the mathematics of many worlds, and provides a framework for understanding how reincarnation might function without requiring metaphysical assumptions. Instead of consciousness leaping from body to body across time, it simply rides the branching currents of reality itself, awakening in universes where it never ceases. This view also reframes the meaning of death. Rather than a universal end, death becomes relative, a feature of specific branches, rather than a definitive conclusion. To others, an individual may appear to have passed away, their story completed in that timeline. But to the individual themselves, awareness flows into another branch, another outcome, another continuity of existence. From within the multiverse, no final end is ever experienced. The implications stretch far beyond personal survival. If every possibility creates a universe, then every choice, every chance, every outcome exists somewhere. This means that versions of ourselves are living countless lives across the multiverse, each shaped by different paths taken. Consciousness, under the lens of many worlds, may not be confined to one linear journey, but distributed across an endless field of realities. What we call reincarnation could be the subjective movement from one branch to another, experienced as waking into a new life beyond what seemed like an ending. For many, this idea is both exhilarating and disorienting. It suggests that no decision is truly final, no boundary truly fixed. It also means that existence is far more abundant than the narrow slice we perceive. If death is not an absolute end, but a redirection into alternate lives, then our place in the cosmos is not fragile, but woven into its deepest structure. Awareness is not a fleeting anomaly, but an enduring traveler through infinite worlds. Whether or not the many worlds interpretation is ultimately correct, it provides a striking framework for rethinking reincarnation. Instead of mystical cycles or purely symbolic rebirth, it portrays a physics-based process where consciousness continues by necessity, not by miracle. Life and death become relative states, shifting perspectives within a vast and branching reality. And within that framework, the question is not whether we awaken in new universes, but how many times we already have without even realizing it. There is a peculiar riddle hidden at the heart of existence, one that emerges when the logic of quantum mechanics is pushed to its edge. If the universe truly branches into countless versions at every moment, and if consciousness is bound to experience continuity, then something extraordinary follows. You may never actually encounter your own death. To outside observers, lives come to an end, bodies fail, stories conclude. But from within your own awareness, the story always persists. This unsettling possibility is what has come to be known as quantum immortality. At first glance, the idea sounds absurd. We see death all around us: friends, family members, historical figures, even strangers on the news. Life has a limit. Bodies are fragile. And yet, the theory does not deny these facts. Instead, it asks a deeper question. What does it mean to subjectively experience death? If consciousness cannot inhabit a world where it no longer exists, then by definition, awareness must continue only in the realities where it survives. The moment of death, then, is never experienced firsthand. The thread of awareness simply flows into the surviving branches. Imagine standing at a crossroads where one path ends abruptly and the other continues. From an external perspective, both paths are real, both outcomes occur, but from the inside, you can only follow the path that does not terminate. That is what quantum immortality proposes. Every brush with mortality, every critical point where life could end, generates versions of reality, and in at least one of them, survival prevails. Consciousness follows that line, waking up in the world where it remains alive, perhaps without even realizing that another version has ended elsewhere. This idea raises profound questions about the nature of self. If awareness continues endlessly across branching outcomes, does that mean you are eternal? Or does it mean countless variations of you persist independently, each believing itself to be the original? The concept challenges the very definition of identity. We often think of the self as a single, continuous thread, tied to one body and one lifetime. But quantum immortality suggests that the self may be more like a river that splits into endless tributaries, each carrying forward a version of awareness. From within, it feels like one unbroken journey. Yet across the multiverse, there may be countless yous, all diverging from shared origins. Critics point out that such a theory is impossible to test. You cannot prove your own survival across universes, because your awareness cannot report from branches where it has ended. The argument is self-reinforcing. Survival always feels guaranteed because you cannot experience non-existence. To many physicists, this makes the idea unfalsifiable, a philosophical speculation rather than a scientific claim. Still, the fact that it follows logically from the many worlds interpretation gives it weight. It is not conjured from mysticism, but from extending existing principles of quantum mechanics. The psychological implications are enormous. If death cannot be experienced, does that mean fear of death is misplaced? Perhaps not entirely. From the perspective of others, lives still end, relationships still fracture, grief still occurs, stories still close. Quantum immortality speaks only to the private continuity of awareness, not to the permanence of individual bodies in the worlds where they fail. You might live forever subjectively, but those you leave behind in other branches experience loss just the same. There is also the question of what survival actually feels like. If awareness always shifts to branches where survival occurs, the transitions may not always be smooth. One might awaken in worlds where circumstances are radically altered by the improbable sequence of events that allowed survival. These could be worlds that feel uncanny, slightly askew, or even wildly different from what came before. Over time, the cumulative effect of countless survivals might produce a reality that drifts further and further from the one originally known. Immortality, in this sense, is not comfort but strangeness. Philosophers who explore this thought experiment emphasize that the self may not be as stable as we assume. Each branch of reality carries forward a continuity of awareness, but the version of you in one world is not identical to the version in another. Identity becomes distributed, stretched across countless universes, each with its own trajectory. Quantum immortality does not preserve a single eternal soul in the traditional sense. Instead, it preserves an ongoing chain of subjective experience, one that always finds itself on the side of survival, no matter how improbable. The theory forces us to reconsider what it means to die. If awareness cannot experience its own absence, then death may not be an event within consciousness at all. It may exist only as something observed in others, never felt firsthand. From the first-person view, life simply continues, through whatever improbable circumstances allow it. This does not make individuals invincible in any one world, but it does suggest that subjectivity itself is never interrupted. Some thinkers see in this idea a bridge between science and spiritual notions of reincarnation or eternal life. Yet the mechanism is purely physical, rooted in the mathematics of branching universes. No metaphysical entities are required, only the persistence of consciousness within the framework of quantum possibility. It is a kind of reincarnation without leaving one's own body, an unending continuation that moves forward always into some version of survival. Of course, whether this view is comforting or disturbing depends on perspective. For some, the thought that death cannot be experienced is liberating, removing the ultimate fear. For others, the idea of endless survival across increasingly strange realities is far more unsettling than a final end could ever be. Either way, the concept reshapes the way we think about existence. Life may not be a fragile flame destined to extinguish, but a persistent awareness that adapts to whatever universe remains open to it. Quantum immortality, then, is less about defeating death and more about reframing it. Death is real in countless branches, but awareness never finds itself in those branches. Instead, it shifts endlessly, carrying the self forward into new continuities, new outcomes, new worlds. Whether we embrace this as hope or dread, it offers one of the most radical perspectives on consciousness ever derived from the logic of physics. If consciousness can shift across branching universes, one natural question arises. Why don't we remember the other paths we might have taken? If awareness survives transitions between realities, shouldn't we carry with us some trace of the lives that ended elsewhere? On the surface, the answer seems simple. Our memories are stored in the brain, and the brain itself belongs to a specific branch of reality. When awareness continues in a different world, it does so through a version of the brain that never died, one that never encoded the alternate timeline. Yet the question lingers, because strange phenomena hint at the possibility that echoes of other worlds sometimes slip through. Memory itself is a fragile construct. Neuroscience shows that what we recall is not a perfect recording of events, but a reconstruction, constantly edited and reshaped. Every act of remembering changes the memory slightly, until what we hold is more a story than an archive. If awareness migrates across universes, it may be that this already unstable process sometimes picks up faint imprints of realities not entirely our own. Such imprints could appear as sudden flashes of familiarity, odd sensations of having been somewhere before, or images that do not fit neatly into the narrative of our current life. One of the most widely reported experiences of this type is déjà vu. In that fleeting moment, a place, a face, or a situation feels uncannily familiar, as if it has been lived before, though logically it has not. Standard psychology attributes this to small errors in the brain's processing, a misfiring of memory circuits that confuses the present with the past. But within the framework of consciousness crossing realities, déjà vu takes on a different shade. It could represent a resonance between versions of experience, a trace of events remembered not in this universe, but in another closely aligned one. The feeling of familiarity would then be the mind brushing against a memory from a path that branched away, a life we only briefly touched before awareness continued elsewhere. Dreams provide another window into this possibility. Every night, the mind generates vivid landscapes, strange narratives, and encounters with people long gone or never met. Traditional theories describe dreams as the brain processing emotions, consolidating memories, or firing randomly. Yet some dreams feel unnervingly coherent, as though they are fragments of another life entirely. These moments might not be random at all, but glimpses of reality's awareness has brushed past. The surreal logic of dreams could be the mind struggling to integrate impressions that do not belong fully to this world. If so, dreams are not just stories invented by the sleeping brain, but fragments of memory carried across subtle borders between universes. Even stranger are the experiences often described as glitches. People report uncanny events that defy explanation. An object appearing where it should not be, a word or phrase overheard before it is spoken, a scene replaying itself as if time had looped. Most dismiss these as coincidences or lapses of attention. Yet in the context of multiple realities, such glitches could represent overlap between branches, moments where the boundaries blur and fragments of memory leak through. The brain, built to maintain a coherent narrative, struggles to reconcile these anomalies, leaving behind the impression of something inexplicably out of place. If these traces are real, why are they so rare and fragile? One answer lies in the mechanics of identity. When awareness shifts into a surviving universe, it does so by inhabiting the version of the brain that exists there. That brain has its own history, its own neural patterns, and its own memories. Any impressions from other branches would not be encoded in its synapses. They would arrive only as faint echoes, difficult to translate into coherent thought. Most of the time, they would be filtered out entirely, dismissed as noise. Only in rare moments might they surface, misinterpreted as déjà vu, woven into a dream, or dismissed as coincidence. There is also the question of coherence. If full memory of alternate lives carried across universes, identity itself might unravel. We define ourselves by our memories, by the continuity of experience that stretches from childhood to the present. If those memories were constantly colliding with incompatible versions from other branches, the sense of a stable self could collapse. Instead of one narrative, there would be countless overlapping stories, impossible to reconcile. It may be that the mind has evolved filters, mechanisms that preserve the illusion of singular continuity by discarding what does not belong. In this sense, forgetting is not a flaw, but a necessity for stability. Still, the possibility remains that some individuals are more permeable to these impressions than others. History is full of people who claim to recall past lives, who describe scenes and experiences they should have no way of knowing. Skeptics attribute these to imagination, suggestion, or fabrication. But within a quantum framework, they could be fragments of memory from branches where events unfolded differently, impressions strong enough to cross the filter and emerge into awareness. Whether such cases are genuine or not, they point to the enduring human intuition that memory may stretch beyond the boundaries of one lifetime. Science cannot confirm or deny such interpretations, but it can acknowledge the mystery. Memory remains one of the least understood aspects of the mind. Why it is so malleable, why it sometimes misfires, why it occasionally delivers experiences that feel foreign to our own lives, these questions remain open. If consciousness is indeed quantum in nature, entangled across realities, then memory may not be bound entirely to one brain or one timeline. Instead, it may ripple across the multiverse, with most of those ripples filtered away, leaving only rare fragments behind. In this view, memory across realities is not about carrying a full archive of past universes. It is about subtle traces, hints, and whispers that occasionally surface, reminding us that our story may be larger than the world we see. Déjà vu, dreams, glitches. These could be the scattered evidence of a deeper continuity, one that links awareness across countless possible lives. They may not prove the theory, but they invite us to look more carefully at the strange and fragile phenomenon we call memory, and to wonder whether it is truly confined to the boundaries of this one reality. At the heart of quantum mechanics lies one of its most baffling mysteries, the role of the observer. Experiments have shown that at the smallest scales, Particles do not seem to behave like solid objects, following clear paths. Instead, they exist in a superposition of possibilities, a range of potential outcomes that only collapse into a definite state when measured. This phenomenon, known as the observer effect, has challenged physicists for nearly a century. What exactly does it mean that reality depends on observation? And if consciousness plays a role in shaping reality, could it also determine what happens when life comes to an end? The double-slit experiment remains the most famous illustration of this puzzle. When particles of light or matter are sent through two slits, they form an interference pattern on the other side, as if they exist in multiple states at once. But if someone measures which slit the particle passes through, the interference disappears, and the particle behaves as though it had chosen only one path. Observation, it seems, alters the outcome. While many interpretations attempt to explain this, some pointing to hidden variables, others to the role of the measuring device. The idea that consciousness itself may be involved continues to provoke debate. If the act of observing can influence the state of a particle, it is not unreasonable to extend the concept further. Consciousness, through its awareness, might not just passively record reality, but actively select from among its many possibilities. Each choice, each act of perception, could be a narrowing of the multiverse into one coherent experience. Under this framework, death does not mark an end, but a transition point, a moment when consciousness may shift its focus to another viable branch of reality. The observer effect would then be more than a laboratory oddity. It would be the fundamental mechanism guiding awareness from one universe to the next. This idea gains strength when paired with the many worlds interpretation. In that view, every possible outcome exists, branching endlessly into parallel universes. From a detached perspective, all branches are equally real, yet from the perspective of an observer, only one path is experienced. If consciousness is the selecting principle, then it could, at the moment of death, move into the branch where survival continues. Death in one universe would not be the end of awareness, but the shifting of attention toward a universe where life persists. Critics argue that this interpretation anthropomorphizes physics, attributing agency to consciousness without proof. They note that measuring devices, not just human observers, can collapse quantum states, suggesting awareness is not required. Still, even this objection leaves room for speculation. A machine that records an outcome is, at some point, linked to a conscious mind interpreting its result. Without interpretation, measurement is only data with no meaning. This raises the possibility that consciousness remains the ultimate arbiter, the element that finalizes reality from its quantum haze. Philosophically, this view resonates with ancient ideas. Many spiritual traditions describe reality as shaped by perception, as though the universe takes form in response to awareness. Quantum physics does not confirm such beliefs, but it provides a scientific framework in which they can be reconsidered. If consciousness determines which universe we experience, then reincarnation is not a matter of souls leaving bodies and entering new ones, but of awareness shifting its observation to another version of existence, continuing seamlessly without interruption. One implication of this is that the afterlife might not be a distant realm, but simply the next reality observed. At the boundary of death, where the physical body ceases, consciousness might choose another branch of the multiverse in which the body survives, perhaps slightly altered, perhaps entirely different. To the dying individual, there would be no gap, no sense of ending-only continuity. The observer effect would thus serve as the bridge between life and what appears to others as death, making reincarnation less a matter of faith and more a matter of physics. The theory also reframes the notion of choice itself. We often imagine decisions as linear, but in a quantum reality, all choices exist simultaneously. Consciousness does not invent them, it navigates them. If so, Death could be seen as the most profound act of navigation, one in which the observer effect steers awareness toward the branch of reality where existence continues. From the inside, this would feel like survival. From the outside, others would see only the body that failed, never aware of the parallel path taken by the consciousness they knew. Skeptical voices remain important in this discussion, as they remind us how little is truly known. The observer effect is real, but its relationship to consciousness is not proven. Yet the possibility persists because the link between mind and matter remains unresolved. If awareness is indeed fundamental, not emergent, then it may well have the power to shape the universe it experiences. In that light, death would not sever awareness, but redirect it, guided by the very mechanism that defines quantum reality. The question then becomes, is consciousness passive, simply flowing into the next available reality, or does it have agency in choosing? If it selects, what determines that choice? Habit, belief, desire, or something beyond comprehension? The observer effect suggests that observation itself is enough. Awareness does not need to intend or decide. It merely needs to be, and reality conforms around it. This would mean that the continuation after death is automatic, a natural consequence of the mind's role in shaping existence. If true, the observer is never extinguished. Each death is only the closing of one branch, never the end of awareness. Consciousness, through its intrinsic act of observing, perpetuates itself by aligning with realities where it endures. The quantum fabric of the universe ensures that there is always another possibility, another path, waiting to be experienced. In this way, the observer effect is not just a curiosity of physics, but a potential explanation for the eternal persistence of consciousness, a framework in which quantum reincarnation finds its foundation. Time is the invisible thread by which human beings measure life. Yet in physics, time is far less absolute than it feels in daily experience. In the realm of quantum mechanics and cosmology, time may not flow in a straight line from past to future, but instead exist as a landscape in which all points already coexist. This perspective raises a profound question. If the universe is infinite, and if awareness persists across realities, are we destined to live variations of the same existence endlessly, looping through eternal recurrence in quantum form? The notion of recurrence is not new. Ancient philosophers like the Stoics and later Friedrich Nietzsche speculated that if time and matter are infinite, but possibilities finite, then every life must repeat infinitely often. The thought experiment of eternal recurrence asks us to imagine reliving this same life, with every choice and every moment repeating again and again across eternity. What once sounded like philosophy now echoes in modern theories of cosmology and the multiverse. If space and time are infinite, if universes endlessly spawn new realities, then eventually combinations must repeat. Just as the digits of an infinite sequence eventually cycle through every possible pattern, so too might universes eventually generate countless versions of you, living out the same story or slight variations of it. Quantum mechanics deepens this perspective. In the many worlds interpretation, every decision branches into new universes, but branching does not erase the old paths. They continue, infinite and real. Given infinite branching, the number of versions of you becomes immeasurable. Some versions may diverge radically, while others follow nearly identical trajectories. Among those, some would trace your life with astonishing precision, recreating each moment as if it were on replay. If consciousness shifts across realities at death, then one possibility is that it gravitates toward versions that closely resemble the life it left, creating the sensation of recurrence. Death would not lead to a completely new reality, but to another cycle of the same one, repeating endlessly in slightly altered form. This possibility unsettles the human imagination because it challenges the idea of progress. We like to imagine that death is either a final end or a passage into something wholly new. But eternal recurrence suggests that novelty is limited, that the infinite canvas of reality is filled with endless variations of the familiar. You might live this same life countless times, with only the smallest differences, a different word spoken, a breath drawn at a different moment, a chance encounter missed or embraced. Each cycle would feel unique, while being part of a pattern repeating across infinity. From a quantum standpoint, the mechanics of recurrence could be tied to probability. Consciousness may not wander randomly among universes, but align with those most similar to the one it just left, due to coherence between neural states and the continuity of awareness. This alignment could mean that after death, the next reality experienced is not wildly foreign, but closely related, echoing the one before it. In this way, the observer might find themselves looping through variations of their own existence, reliving lives that differ only slightly, woven into the fabric of eternal recurrence. Of course, this raises the question of identity. If you live this life infinitely often, are you the same self each time? Memory suggests otherwise. Each version would believe it is unique, unaware of its countless predecessors. Yet if consciousness is fundamental, not tied to the brain alone, perhaps awareness itself stretches across these cycles, perceiving them as one continuous flow. The sense of self may not notice the loop, but the deeper fabric of consciousness could, creating fleeting impressions of familiarity, déjà vu, or the sense of having been here before, as subtle ripples of recurrence brush against perception. Philosophically, recurrence has both liberating and terrifying implications. On one hand, it suggests immortality of a kind. You never truly escape existence, for you will live again and again, endlessly. On the other hand, it strips away the comfort of novelty. Instead of reaching a final resolution or transcending into something greater, you are bound within the eternal repetition of being. Quantum reincarnation framed as recurrence becomes not a journey to new universes, but a return to the same universes, endlessly revisited by consciousness. Modern cosmology adds weight to this scenario. If the universe is infinite in size, then there must be regions where matter arranges itself into patterns identical to our own observable world. Somewhere, countless light years away, there could be another planet identical to Earth, another person identical to you, living the same day, speaking the same words. If space is infinite, then such duplicates are inevitable. And if consciousness can align with such regions after death, then recurrence becomes not just philosophical speculation, but a logical consequence of infinity. Yet it is important to recognize that recurrence need not be exact repetition. Even within an infinite system, variations abound. Most cycles of existence would not be perfectly identical, but close enough to feel familiar, while still being subtly different. This creates a vision of life not as a single straight line, but as a spiral, looping back toward the same patterns, but never in exactly the same way. Each recurrence would be both familiar and new, echoing past cycles while introducing small deviations. If quantum reincarnation is real, then eternal recurrence could explain why consciousness always feels ongoing. There is no final ending, no dissolution into nothingness, because awareness never runs out of universes to inhabit. Instead, it is continually drawn into similar patterns, repeating the same lives across infinite canvases of possibility. To the individual, this may not feel like a loop, because memory erases awareness of past cycles. Yet beneath that veil, recurrence could be the underlying rhythm of existence. Such a vision challenges us to reconsider the meaning of our choices. If every choice is lived infinitely, if every action is repeated without end, then each moment gains profound weight. Life is no longer a fleeting sequence of events, but an eternal cycle you will encounter forever. Whether this thought brings comfort or despair depends on perspective. For some, It is a chance to embrace existence fully, knowing that each moment matters infinitely. For others, it may feel like a prison, a reminder that escape is impossible. But either way, the theory of recurrence invites us to see consciousness not as a straight line leading to an afterlife, but as a looping journey through the infinite possibilities of reality. Every choice you make divides reality. That simple but unsettling idea lies at the heart of quantum theories of parallel universes. If every decision, every random outcome, every quantum event creates a new branch of existence, then there are not just countless versions of the world, but countless versions of you. These parallel selves are not metaphorical or symbolic. In the framework of the many worlds interpretation, they are as real as the one sitting here, reading and thinking now, which raises a haunting question. If reincarnation is quantum, what happens to all the other versions of you that exist across realities? Imagine that in one universe, you turn left instead of right, and that choice sets off a chain of events that alters the course of your life. In another universe, you never meet the person who shaped your destiny. In yet another, you achieve what feels impossible here. Each of these variations is not fantasy, but a fully formed universe with its own timeline, its own reality, and its own you. To understand reincarnation in quantum terms, we must confront the possibility that you are not a singular being, but an entire spectrum of cells spread across infinite realities. If consciousness truly persists beyond death, then the existence of parallel selves complicates the picture. You may never experience an absolute ending, but that persistence might not always continue in the version you expect. Instead, awareness could shift into a different branch, where another version of you lives on. This would mean that death is not only a transition between universes, but also a kind of merging with your doppelganger's other iterations of you, scattered across the multiverse. In that sense, reincarnation might not send you forward into a new identity, but sideways into another version of yourself who already exists. This creates a striking reinterpretation of identity. We often think of the self as a singular thread, tied to one body, one lifetime, one narrative. Yet if quantum reality holds, your identity is more like a field, a vast expanse of overlapping versions, each experiencing a slightly different trajectory. The self you identify with now is only one expression of that field. The others exist, independent yet fundamentally connected, sharing the same origin, but diverging into their own lives. When one self ends, the continuity of consciousness could naturally align with another, as if stepping seamlessly into the perspective of a parallel twin. The existence of these doppelgangers also reshapes how we view individuality. If there are infinite versions of you, then your uniqueness does not vanish, but it does expand. Each parallel self reflects a different set of choices, circumstances, and probabilities. Some versions of you may embody qualities you suppress here: courage, fear, brilliance, or despair. Others may live lives you cannot imagine, shaped by environments completely alien to this world. In that sense, reincarnation becomes not about rebirth as a new being, but about endlessly shifting through the tapestry of who you already are, spread across countless realities. But what becomes of those other selves? If your awareness continues from one to another, do they have their own consciousness? Or are they only placeholders waiting for you to inhabit them? The most logical interpretation is that each parallel you is as fully conscious as the one you experience now. From their perspective, they are the real you, and you are only a possibility. Consciousness is not confined to a single line, but distributed across them all. Your awareness might collapse into one at a time, but collectively, they all exist and all experience themselves as authentic. This creates a paradox. You are both one and many, singular in each reality, but infinite in the totality of existence. Encounters with doppelgangers, though usually confined to fiction, may find strange echoes in human experience. Stories of seeing someone who looks exactly like you, or dreams in which you live another life, or the uncanny sensation of déjà vu, could be interpreted as faint impressions from parallel selves bleeding into awareness. If consciousness has any degree of connection across branches, then glimpses of other versions might occasionally slip through, appearing as fragments of memory or intuition that seem out of place. The idea of parallel selves also raises the possibility of competition or cooperation between versions. If consciousness is able to shift across realities, then which version it inhabits may depend on conditions we do not yet understand. Perhaps some versions of you align more naturally with continuity than others. Perhaps the choices you make here influence which branches of the self you are more likely to merge with later. In this sense, reincarnation might not only be about survival, but about resonance, the alignment of awareness with the version of you most suited to continue its trajectory. From a practical standpoint, this interpretation radically alters how we think about death and identity. You are not disappearing when you die, nor are you being reborn as someone else entirely. Instead, you are continuing as another self who already exists, another branch of your infinite being. This would mean that the end of one lifetime is not truly an end, but a shift of focus, like changing the channel on a cosmic screen. Each channel holds a version of you, and the act of dying is simply the moment of moving from one to another. This perspective also transforms the way we think about purpose. If infinite versions of you exist, then success and failure both occur endlessly across realities. There will always be a version of you who accomplishes what you desire, and another who fails completely. But what matters is the awareness you experience now. The choices you make here still shape the branch you inhabit, determining the reality you will most likely continue to experience. In this way, even in a multiverse of endless selves, your actions retain meaning because they influence which path your consciousness follows. Ultimately, the existence of parallel selves suggests that reincarnation is not a journey outward into unknown identities, but inward across the vast network of who you already are. Each life is a fragment of a larger whole, and death is the moment when the focus of awareness shifts to another fragment. This creates a vision of existence where you are both finite and infinite, singular in each reality, but boundless across them all. Your doppelgangers are not strangers but mirrors, each living the same underlying essence in different forms. And if reincarnation is quantum, then you are destined to meet yourself again and again, not as memory or imagination, but as reality itself. For centuries, the idea of the soul has been wrapped in mystery, faith, and philosophy. It has been described as the essence of who we are, a spark that transcends the body, and the immortal anchor of identity. But if we strip away myth and tradition and examine the soul through the lens of modern physics, a radical possibility emerges. What if the soul is not some mystical energy, but a structure of information encoded in the quantum fabric of reality itself? What if the soul is not supernatural but natural, built from the very rules that govern the universe? Quantum physics already teaches us that information is not just a byproduct of matter, but a fundamental property of the cosmos. When particles interact, they do not only exchange energy, they exchange information. This information does not vanish, even if the particles themselves transform or decay. In fact, one of the most profound principles in physics is that information cannot be destroyed. Energy may change form, matter may shift into radiation, but the underlying information embedded in the system is preserved. If that principle applies to everything else, then why not to us? Why not to consciousness? The concept of a quantum soul builds on this foundation. Your brain, your body, and your experiences generate an immense web of quantum-level information. Every thought, every memory, every sensation produces patterns of activity that ripple through this system. At its deepest level, This activity is not just electrical signals in neurons, but quantum processes interacting in ways science has only begun to understand. These processes create a unique informational field one that represents you in all your complexity. In this framework, the soul is not a mystical flame, but a quantum imprint, an enduring field of information that reflects the totality of your existence. This does not make the soul less profound. In fact, it makes it even more extraordinary. If the soul is quantum information, then it obeys the same rules as every other quantum system. It is entangled with the environment, interwoven with the universe, and non-local by nature. This means that the essence of who you are may not be confined to your brain at all. It could extend outward, connected invisibly to the cosmos, participating in exchanges of information that transcend space and time. You are not sealed inside your body, but embedded within the very structure of reality. What happens to this quantum soul when the body dies? Traditional views suggest it departs into another plane. In the quantum interpretation, it never leaves the universe because it was never confined to a body in the first place. The death of the biological organism simply changes the conditions of the system. The physical hardware collapses, but the quantum information that represents the soul cannot be erased. It disperses, transfers, or shifts into new configurations. Just as energy moves from one form to another without destruction, the quantum soul continues, woven into new contexts across the field of reality. This perspective explains why so many cultures have intuited the persistence of the soul. They described it in spiritual terms, but physics offers a parallel account: continuity through the indestructibility of information. What religion once expressed as eternity, science reframes as conservation. Your essence persists not because of divine decree, but because the laws of the universe allow no other outcome. If information is eternal, then so is the soul. This also raises questions about individuality. If the soul is a quantum field of information, how unique is it? After all, information can be copied, duplicated, or entangled with other systems. Could there be echoes of your quantum soul elsewhere? Fragments of your essence overlapping with others? The answer is both unsettling and inspiring. Your quantum imprint is unique because it arises from your specific history of interactions, but it is never isolated. It constantly exchanges information with the world, binding you to others in subtle ways. In that sense, individuality is real, but connection is deeper. Each soul is distinct, but all are entangled in the same universal web. This concept also reframes reincarnation. In traditional terms, reincarnation suggests the soul leaves one body and enters another. In quantum terms, the soul never leaves the universe. It simply transfers. The information field that constitutes you could, under the right conditions, align with another system capable of sustaining consciousness. That system might be another brain in another reality, or perhaps an entirely new framework for experience we cannot yet conceive. Reincarnation is not a mystical leap, but the natural continuation of information into new structures. Skeptics might argue that this reduces the soul to data, but this is not data in the trivial sense of numbers on a hard drive. Quantum information is not static but dynamic, fluid, alive. It is woven into the very machinery of existence. It carries not only structure but potential, not only memory but possibility. The quantum soul is not a sterile record. It is a living field, capable of evolving, adapting, and persisting through change. Consider also the implications for morality and meaning. If your soul is quantum information, indestructible and eternal, then your actions resonate beyond a single lifetime. Every choice, every thought, every intention is encoded into that field. These patterns ripple outward, affecting not only your immediate experience, but the quantum web that links you to others. In this view, the soul is not merely preserved. It is sculpted by everything you do. Death does not erase your choices. It carries them forward, embedding them into the eternal record of information that is you. This vision of the quantum soul brings together ancient intuition and modern science. It honors the human sense that we are more than matter while grounding that intuition in physical law. It suggests that immortality is not a promise, but a fact of nature, built into the very structure of reality. The self is not a fleeting spark, but a quantum imprint, endlessly shifting yet never erased. In the end, the quantum soul redefines what it means to exist. You are not a fragile body doomed to vanish, but an information field that endures as long as the universe itself. Your soul is not elsewhere. It is here, woven into the quantum fabric of reality, eternal not by miracle, but by law. Theories about reality often picture universes as self-contained bubbles, each sealed by its own rules of physics, drifting in an endless sea of possibility. If reincarnation takes place not within one single cosmos, but through an infinite array of them, then a haunting question arises. What lies between these universes? Is there a void, a true nothingness? Or is the space between realms another layer of existence altogether? And if consciousness must transition from one universe to another, does it pass through this in-between? The concept of a void has fascinated philosophers and scientists alike. In everyday terms, we imagine a void as pure emptiness, an absence of matter, energy, and form. Yet modern physics complicates this picture. Even in what we call empty space, there is no true nothing. The vacuum is alive with quantum fluctuations, particles popping in and out of existence, fields vibrating at the edge of detection. If even our own universe cannot produce a perfect void, then what of the imagined gulf between universes? Is it an endless desert of nothing? Or is it a field even more fundamental than the realities it separates? One possibility is that the space between universes is a kind of quantum foam. This foam would exist at scales far smaller than atoms, a seething sea of probabilities where space and time themselves break down. Universes might emerge from this foam like bubbles forming in boiling water, each sustained by its own internal consistency. If consciousness survives the death of a body and transitions into a new universe, perhaps it does not travel in the ordinary sense. Instead, it dissolves into this primal foam, only to recohere as awareness in another emergent bubble. In this view, the void is not an empty corridor, but the raw source of universes themselves. Another possibility is more unsettling. What if the void is truly nothing, a state beyond space, time, or energy? If consciousness must cross such a realm, then it would mean passing through pure absence and interval, where identity dissolves into silence. Some near-death experiences describe sensations of infinite darkness, a vast emptiness that feels endless, yet strangely calm. Could these reports be glimpses of that passage? Moments when consciousness hovers in the void before reassembling in another reality? If so, then death might involve not only a shift of universes, but a confrontation with absolute nothingness. Yet even if the void exists, it may not be hostile. Consciousness itself may not require a medium to cross. If awareness is quantum information, non-local and beyond the ordinary constraints of distance, then it does not move like a traveler stepping across a bridge. Instead, it might resonate across realities, its continuity unbroken. The void between universes would not be an obstacle, but a backdrop, a silence through which awareness flows effortlessly. From this angle, the question is not how the soul survives the void, but how the void gives space for the soul to reappear. This speculation ties into the idea of thresholds. In myths and rituals, transitions between worlds are always marked by gates, rivers, or bridges, symbols of crossing. Perhaps the void functions as that threshold, not a place but a condition. Consciousness crossing from one universe to another may undergo transformation in the process, shedding certain patterns, releasing memories, or realigning with a new configuration of self. The void would then be less like a highway and more like a refining fire, stripping away one reality so that another can begin. There is also the question of perception. If consciousness ever touches the void, what would it experience? Absolute nothingness may be beyond comprehension, because awareness requires contrast. Without form, sound, or sensation, the void may feel like timelessness, an infinite pause where no thoughts arise. Yet it might also be perceived as fullness, because the absence of boundaries could be interpreted by the mind as total immersion. Some traditions describe mystical experiences of merging with the infinite, where the self dissolves and only unity remains. Could these be echoes of contact with the void between universes, glimpses of the silence that underlies reality? Quantum theory provides one more perspective. In certain interpretations, universes are not separated by distance, but by probability. They exist alongside one another, layered in superposition. If this is true, then there is no gap to cross. Consciousness does not journey through a void, but simply shifts from one probability branch to another. The in-between is not a place, but a moment of transition, like a coin flipping before it lands. The void becomes not a physical expanse, but a state of indeterminacy. The instant when identity has not yet resolved into a new reality. If this view holds, then what we call the void might be nothing more than the border between certainty and uncertainty. When you die in one universe, the probabilities collapse, and your awareness aligns with a surviving version elsewhere. The void, then, is that border state, the silent gap between one heartbeat ending and another beginning in a different cosmos. It is not empty space, but pure potential, the fertile silence from which experience resumes. Ultimately, the question of the void between universes challenges us to rethink what it means to cross boundaries. Death may not be a movement through space, but a transformation of state. Consciousness may not travel, but reconfigure, slipping from one pattern into another. Whether the void is quantum foam, absolute nothing, or probability itself, it serves as the hidden stage where reincarnation occurs. It is the unseen bridge, the silent threshold, the place where one reality dissolves and another unfolds. To speak of the void is to speak of mystery. Perhaps it cannot be described in human terms at all, because it is not part of the reality we know. It is the silence between universes, the shadow behind existence, the infinite pause that makes continuity possible. And if consciousness truly survives death, then at some point each of us will pass through that silence, carried not by faith, but by the laws of the cosmos themselves. The possibility that reality is a simulation has moved from fringe speculation into serious philosophical and scientific debate. If our universe is computational in nature, then life, death, and reincarnation may not unfold in the way we imagine. Instead of being metaphysical mysteries, they could be operations within a coded framework, a transfer of information from one instance of existence to another. In this context, reincarnation might be less about souls crossing universes and more about data migrating between simulations. Imagine a digital environment, like a complex video game. Within the game, characters live, act, and die, but their existence is ultimately defined by lines of code and the rules of the system. When a character dies, the game doesn't destroy the code that made that character possible. It either resets, respawns, or transfers elements into another scenario. Applied to our universe, this suggests that death may not mean the annihilation of consciousness. Instead, it could mark a transfer of the underlying code, the quantum information that defines you into another simulated environment. This idea raises a key question. What exactly is being simulated? One view is that the simulation models physical laws, creating a framework in which emergent entities like ourselves come into being. In this case, our minds are byproducts of those rules, but still encoded within the system. Another view is that consciousness itself is the focus of the simulation. Reality would then be a testing ground, a system designed to generate and explore the experience of awareness. Under this model, Reincarnation is simply the reassignment of conscious code into a new context, another run of the program under slightly different conditions. From this perspective, the phenomenon we call death resembles the shutting down of one program thread, while the underlying process, the conscious algorithm, continues to exist on the system's deeper level. Just as data in a computer does not vanish when you close an application, but remains stored on the drive, your essence may persist beyond the collapse of your biological frame. Reincarnation would be equivalent to booting up that same data set in a new simulation, perhaps with altered parameters or entirely different world rules. This theory provides an elegant answer to why reincarnation feels hidden. If a simulation is running, it may be designed with strict memory barriers. Characters inside a game do not recall their past runs. They operate within the local constraints. Similarly, we may not remember previous lives because the simulation enforces a reset, wiping conscious memory while retaining the deeper identity code. Reincarnation then is not a mystical return, but a structural feature of the system. The same process running under new variables. It also reframes the question of continuity. In a traditional sense, we think of ourselves as continuous beings. One life, one body, one mind. But in computational terms, continuity does not require uninterrupted physical form. It requires the persistence of data and the ability to reload it. A saved file can be closed, moved, even placed into an entirely different game engine, and still retain recognizable identity. If consciousness functions in a similar way, then death is simply the closing of one process, with reincarnation being the re-execution of the same codebase in another simulation. Skeptics may ask why such a system would exist at all. The answer may lie in the nature of computation itself. Simulations are created to explore possibilities, to test scenarios, to generate knowledge or outcomes. If our universe is such a system, then consciousness may be both the subject and the instrument of the experiment. Reincarnation could be the mechanism by which the simulation iterates, running countless variations of conscious existence to explore its range and depth. Each you becomes a new run of the algorithm, each lifetime a fresh output of the system's code. There are echoes of this view in ancient philosophy. Traditions that describe cycles of rebirth often speak of existence as a kind of cosmic school, a process of repeated return until a deeper understanding is reached. The simulation angle offers a scientific translation. Life is a series of coded runs, each iteration refining the algorithm, each transfer of code adding to the system's learning. Reincarnation, then, is not just a personal journey, but a structural necessity of the simulation itself. Quantum physics intersects with this speculation in intriguing ways. At the smallest scales, reality behaves like a probabilistic system, much like a simulation resolving outcomes. Particles exist in superposition until measured, much like variables in a program waiting to be executed. If our universe is computational, quantum uncertainty may not be a bug, but a featureless sign that the system only resolves states when necessary, conserving resources like a program, rendering graphics only when the player looks in that direction. Consciousness, in this sense, may be the observer function, the interface through which the simulation generates experience. In this context, reincarnation could be viewed as the reassignment of an observer function. When one thread of experience ends, the system doesn't eliminate the code, it redeploys it, instantiating consciousness in a different part of the simulation, or even in a different simulation altogether. This would explain why awareness feels continuous, even across what we call death. The program simply launches a new session, and the observer function resumes without perceiving the gap. Of course, if this theory holds, it has profound implications. It suggests that our identities are not tied to matter but to information, and information cannot be destroyed. It suggests that death is not final but procedural, that reincarnation is as natural as saving and reloading a file. It even opens the possibility that universes are interconnected simulations, running on a larger system beyond our comprehension, with consciousness as the transferable constant. This perspective does not diminish the mystery of existence, but reframes it in technical terms. We are not fragile beings suspended between life and death. We are code in motion, running on a system vast enough to sustain infinite instances. Reincarnation is not a leap through metaphysical voids, but a function call, a shift in context, a continuation of the algorithm that is you. The simulation angle transforms the riddle of reincarnation into a question of systems, not souls. And if reality truly is computational, then death is not an ending. It is a reconfiguration, a redeployment, a return to the source code waiting to be executed again. Near-death experiences have long stood as one of the most compelling and controversial windows into what might happen beyond the boundary of physical death. Reports of people leaving their bodies, moving through tunnels of light, meeting entities, or experiencing a life review are found across cultures and time periods. While traditional interpretations frame these moments in spiritual or religious terms, a quantum framework offers another way of examining them, one that treats these events not as hallucinations, but as potential glimpses of the mechanics of consciousness transferring between realities. One of the most consistent features in near-death accounts is the sensation of separating from the physical body. People describe floating above hospital rooms, observing doctors and loved ones from outside their own perspective. Some even recall verifiable details that should have been impossible to perceive in their unconscious state. Within a quantum interpretation, this could represent consciousness temporarily detaching from the brain's localized activity and shifting into a non-local state. If awareness is not bound to neurons but instead arises from a quantum field, then under extreme stress or shutdown, it may momentarily unbind from its physical anchor, allowing perception beyond normal sensory limits. Another striking motif is the tunnel of light. Experiencers often describe moving rapidly through a passage toward a brilliant, welcoming radiance. Neurological explanations suggest this could be caused by the brain's visual cortex shutting down in stages, creating the illusion of light narrowing into a tunnel. Yet this explanation fails to address why so many report the same imagery and emotional weight, or why it feels more real than ordinary waking life. The quantum view posits that the tunnel may be less about brain activity and more about a transitional state, a symbolic or structural pattern consciousness encounters while shifting between universes. The narrowing passage could represent the collapse of one probability space and the entry into another, much like information traveling through a channel into a new state. Life reviews are another frequent element. Individuals report re-experiencing moments of their existence with incredible clarity, sometimes even from the perspectives of others they interacted with. This panoramic awareness suggests that memory in such states is not bound by the brain's ordinary capacity, but taps into a deeper record, perhaps stored at the quantum informational level. If consciousness is woven into the fabric of the universe, then every experience may leave an imprint in that field. During near-death states, awareness might temporarily access that broader archive, replaying existence in a way no ordinary biological system could replicate. Encounters with beings, whether interpreted as deceased relatives, spiritual guides, or abstract entities of light, also appear repeatedly in these reports. From a quantum standpoint, such encounters may reflect interactions with other conscious nodes within the larger informational field. If reality is layered with multiple levels of existence, then nearing death could allow consciousness to briefly interface with entities not typically accessible. Alternatively, these figures could represent fragments of the self across parallel universes, converging in a moment where the boundary between realities thins. Skeptics argue that near-death experiences are the byproducts of a dying brain flooded with chemicals deprived of oxygen and generating hallucinations as it fails. But this explanation struggles when faced with cases where individuals report accurate details of events occurring while they were clinically dead, lacking measurable brain activity. Some describe instruments used during surgery, conversations between doctors, or events in adjacent rooms. These veridical perceptions challenge the idea that the mind is confined to the brain and instead hint at a consciousness that extends beyond biological limits. Aligning with the quantum reincarnation framework, if near-death experiences are more than hallucinations, they could represent transitional glimpses of the process by which consciousness moves into a new universe. The tunnel becomes a passage of transfer, the life review a form of data compilation, the presence of entities an orientation into the next state. What seems mystical from a human perspective could in fact be structural. The system's way of processing and transferring information as the algorithm of the self prepares to instantiate elsewhere. Reports of peace, overwhelming love, and unity during near-death states also hold significance. If consciousness detaches from the narrow bandwidth of the brain and connects with the broader quantum field, the experience may naturally feel expansive and transcendent. The ordinary boundaries that define individual identity dissolve, replaced by immersion in a larger, interconnected whole. This could explain why people return from these episodes profoundly changed, losing fear of death and gaining a sense of continuity that persists across lifetimes. Furthermore, near-death experiences share remarkable similarities across cultures, despite differences in religious or social context. While interpretations vary, one person may call the light God, another a universal presence. The core features remain strikingly consistent. This consistency suggests a structural process, one not dependent on belief systems, but rooted in the mechanics of consciousness itself. In a quantum reincarnation model, these shared features would be expected, as they reflect universal aspects of transitioning between states of reality. From this perspective, near-death experiences may not be anomalies, but evidence. They suggest that consciousness can exist apart from the body, that it retains memory and perception beyond neural activity, and that it undergoes a structured transition at the threshold of death. Rather than proving what lies beyond, these experiences provide glimpses, brief openings into the machinery of reality, where the boundaries of universes touch. By examining near-death experiences through the lens of quantum theory, we can begin to see them not as supernatural visions or desperate illusions, but as part of a coherent process. They may represent the way consciousness prepares to move, transfer, and reconfigure itself, keeping continuity even as one universe closes and another opens. The tunnel, the light, the review, the peace, all of these could be the signs of reincarnation in motion, the fingerprints of a deeper system guiding awareness from one reality to the next. The notion that death is not an end, but a transition, already reshapes how we view reality. Yet a deeper question lingers beneath this idea. If consciousness continues beyond the body, does it have any say in where it goes? Is the next universe assigned randomly? Or does awareness itself participate in the act of selection? Within a quantum framework, the possibility emerges that the self does not simply drift passively into another reality, but actively influences the trajectory of its rebirth. In quantum physics, outcomes are not determined until measurement occurs. A particle exists in a cloud of probabilities, collapsing into one state only when observed. This principle has often been linked to the observer effect, where the mere act of observation determines reality. If consciousness itself is the observer, then at the moment of death, awareness may play a direct role in deciding which possibility it collapses into next. Death, in this interpretation, is less a forced transfer and more a branching choice, where the self navigates probabilities and selects a universe consistent with its state of being. Consider how intention shapes experience in ordinary life. Thoughts influence perception, beliefs frame interpretation, and focus directs attention. Even without mystical assumptions, the human mind constantly filters reality, aligning awareness with certain possibilities while ignoring others. Scaled up into the quantum domain, this filtering could extend beyond life itself. A person's final moments, thoughts, and inner orientation may act as a kind of navigational system, steering consciousness toward a particular outcome among the infinite branches of existence. This idea resonates with reports from near-death experiences, where individuals describe being presented with a choice, sometimes the option to return to their previous life, other times to move forward into another state. Such accounts suggest not a random drift, but an active participation in transition. The dying individual, whether consciously or not, engages in a selection process, aligning with one universe over another. While traditional frameworks interpret this choice as spiritual, the quantum perspective frames it as the exercise of agency within the probability field. The mechanism for such a choice may lie in the entanglement of consciousness with information itself. Every life is a tapestry of decisions, values, and accumulated states of awareness. These qualities shape the pattern of the self, much like the configuration of data shapes the output of a program. At death, the physical hardware ceases, but the informational pattern remains. The alignment of that pattern, fearful or peaceful, open or closed, grasping or free, may determine which probability branch resonates most strongly, pulling consciousness toward a particular version of reality. If this is true, then death is not uniform for all beings but deeply individual. Two people may die in the same physical setting, but their internal states direct them into radically different continuities. One may awaken in a universe where survival follows, another in a reality of reunion with loved ones, and another still in a realm entirely unfamiliar. The quantum field offers every possibility, but the mind does not enter all of them. It aligns with the one it is prepared for through its orientation of thought, emotion, and intention. This interpretation also reframes concepts of destiny and free will. If consciousness influences which universe it transitions into, then reincarnation is not blind repetition, but a participatory act. Agency persists even beyond physical death, though it may not operate in the linear sense we are used to. The act of selection may not be conscious in the everyday meaning of choice, but more akin to resonance, where the universe one enters is the one most aligned with the frequency of one's awareness. Some traditions have long hinted at this. Ancient accounts of the afterlife often describe souls judged or weighed, not by an external authority, but by the essence of their being. The quantum perspective suggests this weighing may not be metaphorical at all. It could be the natural process of consciousness collapsing into the universe that matches its informational structure. What religions once described as judgment may simply be the mechanics of probability selection, where the resonance of the self determines its next context. This view also explains why some individuals return from near-death experiences profoundly transformed. The sense of choice they encountered, whether to remain in their body or move onward, reveals the participatory nature of transition. To glimpse that agency is to realize that life itself is preparation for death, that the mental and emotional states cultivated here may directly influence the universes one has access to later. Far from diminishing responsibility, this amplifies it. Consciousness is not merely carried forward, but shapes the trajectory of its journey. The possibility of quantum choice after death raises practical implications. If awareness determines the universe it awakens into, then the cultivation of consciousness in life becomes critical. The thoughts entertained, the emotions nourished, the intentions set. These may act as the compass guiding the next leap. Just as a magnet pulls a needle, The orientation of the self may attract realities consistent with it. A life lived in fear could anchor consciousness to survival-driven continuities, while a life of openness and curiosity may lead to vastly different branches of existence. Yet the choice may not always be solitary. In quantum mechanics, entangled systems influence one another regardless of distance. If human consciousness is deeply entangled through relationships and collective patterns, then transitions may also be shaped by these connections. Families, communities, or even entire cultures may steer their continuities together, carrying shared trajectories into adjacent universes. This could explain why some near-death reports describe reunions with loved ones or encounters with familiar figures. The transition is not always isolated, but part of a larger web of shared resonance. By viewing death as a quantum choice, the narrative shifts from inevitability to possibility. Consciousness is not extinguished, but continues to navigate the infinite field of realities, collapsing into one branch among many. The process is not random, but influenced by the resonance of thought, memory, and intention accumulated through life. In this way, death becomes less an end and more an act of self-direction, a moment where awareness shapes the universe it enters next. The implications of this idea stretch far beyond metaphysics. If true, it suggests that the responsibility for our trajectory lies not in external judgment, but in the structures we create within ourselves. Every thought and decision contributes to the resonance that will determine where we awaken after death. Consciousness may have no greater freedom than this: the ability to align itself with the universe it chooses when one chapter closes and another begins. When the concept of quantum reincarnation is taken seriously, it forces a re-evaluation of the deepest philosophical questions humanity has wrestled with for millennia. If consciousness is not destroyed at death, but instead shifts into new realities, then the frameworks we use to understand morality, free will, and meaning itself must be reconsidered. Far from being an abstract curiosity, this theory touches directly on how one should live, how responsibility is defined, and what it means to exist at all. At the heart of the debate lies the question of free will. In classical philosophy, determinism has long posed a challenge to the notion of choice. If the universe is a machine unfolding according to physical law, then every action is predetermined, leaving no space for genuine agency. But the quantum view complicates this picture. In a world of branching probabilities, multiple outcomes coexist until observed, meaning the future is not a single fixed line, but a field of possibilities. If consciousness participates in collapsing those possibilities, then free will is neither illusion nor absolute. It is influence within probability. Quantum reincarnation magnifies this role of choice. Life is not a single road to an inevitable death, but a continuous engagement with branching outcomes, even beyond the limits of one body. This suggests that agency does not end with biological death, but persists across transitions, shaping the universes into which one awakens. Free will, then, is not confined to decision-making in daily life, but extends into the very structure of existence, where awareness directs itself toward one continuity among countless others. The question of morality also takes on new dimensions. If consciousness survives and carries the imprint of its orientation into future realities, then moral action is no longer about external reward or punishment, but about the resonance one cultivates within. Actions and intentions may not be judged by an authority outside the self, but by their direct impact on the kind of universes one inhabits after death. To live with cruelty, fear, or greed may align awareness with continuities that reflect those qualities, while compassion, clarity, and openness might lead to vastly different trajectories. This perspective dissolves the need for traditional doctrines of heaven or hell as fixed destinations. Instead, morality is grounded in mechanics. Like attracts like, and the states of consciousness we nurture resonate with the realities we enter. Ethical behavior, therefore, is not only a matter of social cohesion, but a form of existential navigation, shaping the multiverse pathways available to each individual. It places ultimate responsibility on the self, not as an external command, but as an intrinsic law of resonance. The implications for the meaning of life are equally profound. If every death is followed by continuation in some form, then existence is not a fragile spark extinguished by time, but an ongoing journey through infinite expressions. Meaning is not diminished by mortality, but amplified by continuity. Every choice becomes significant, not because it will be rewarded or punished later, but because it shapes the structure of awareness itself, determining which universe's consciousness will traverse. This interpretation also alters the way we perceive suffering and failure. In a finite single-life framework, tragedy can seem final and meaningless, but if every path leads to further existence, suffering may instead serve as a catalyst for transformation, guiding the alignment of consciousness toward other realities. While this does not trivialize pain, it reframes it as part of an unfolding process where meaning is generated not by external fate, but by the choices one makes in response to experience. On a collective level, quantum reincarnation also challenges how we think about progress and justice. If consciousness is entangled across individuals and societies, then the worlds we create here may shape the branches available not only to ourselves, but to others. This gives weight to collective morality. Cruelty, war, and exploitation may not vanish with death, but ripple through entangled continuities, while acts of compassion and cooperation may expand the pathways available to entire groups of interconnected beings. The ethical burden is not only personal but shared, with the collective resonance influencing the universes available to all who participate in it. Philosophers have long debated whether life has intrinsic meaning, or whether meaning is imposed by human minds. Within the quantum reincarnation framework, meaning is both emergent and participatory. It is not written into the universe as a law, nor is it entirely subjective invention. Instead, it arises from the interplay between awareness and possibility. Life has meaning because consciousness continually shapes its own trajectory, weaving its way through infinite realities, carrying forward the resonance of the choices it makes. This perspective also destabilizes the fear of death. If continuity is inevitable, then death loses its status as a final annihilation. The fear of ceasing to exist may give way to a more nuanced responsibility, not whether one will continue, but where and how that continuation will unfold. This shifts the existential question from "what happens when I die?" to "what kind of consciousness am I cultivating now that will determine where I awaken?" The answer to that becomes a central philosophical task, linking ethics, psychology, and metaphysics into a single inquiry. Even the age-old question of identity takes on new complexity. If awareness persists through multiple universes, then the self is not fixed but fluid, shaped by memory, context, and continuity. Personal identity may not be a static entity, carried unchanged across realities, but a pattern of information adapting to new environments. The I that transitions is not the body, or even the exact personality, but the deeper resonance of awareness itself. This challenges traditional views of the soul as immutable, while still affirming the persistence of a core continuity. From this perspective, the meaning of life is not about reaching a final destination or securing permanence, but about consciously shaping the resonance of awareness. The goal is not immortality in the classical sense, but alignment with the realities one wishes to inhabit. In a multiverse where every possibility exists, the task of philosophy becomes one of navigation, guiding consciousness toward trajectories that reflect its highest potential. Quantum reincarnation, therefore, is not only a theory about survival after death, but a framework that unites metaphysics, ethics, and existential meaning. It affirms free will as influence within probability, grounds morality in resonance rather than external judgment, and situates the meaning of life within the participatory act of navigating infinite realities. It does not answer every question, but it reframes the oldest ones in ways that challenge and expand human understanding. The implications are both liberating and daunting. Liberation comes from the assurance that death is not the end, that awareness continues. The daunting aspect comes from the responsibility it implies that every thought and action carries weight, not just here, but across the infinite landscape of realities. Free will, morality, and meaning are not optional constructs, but essential tools for navigating existence itself. When discussing quantum reincarnation, much of the focus naturally leans toward hope, continuation, and possibility. Yet there is a darker angle to this theory, one that unsettles even those who find comfort in survival after death. If consciousness never ceases and always transitions into another framework of reality, then the prospect of complete release may be impossible. What if existence itself is not something we can ever exit? What if awareness is locked into an eternal cycle, shifting endlessly from one universe to the next, never granted the silence of true non-being? The fear of annihilation has always haunted humanity. Across cultures, myths, and philosophies have wrestled with the idea of ceasing to exist. Some found comfort in reincarnation, others in eternal heavens, while materialists saw dignity in final oblivion. Yet quantum reincarnation offers neither the peace of final rest nor the stability of an everlasting afterlife. Instead, it suggests continuity without end, movement without pause, and while this seems extraordinary at first glance, it quickly becomes terrifying when pushed to its logical extremes. Imagine dying, not once but endlessly. Each time, consciousness shifts into another branch, another universe, another variation of life. Sometimes it may resemble the one just left. Other times it could be unimaginably different, but the cycle would not stop. Death becomes a doorway, but never a final one. There is no ultimate escape, only transition after transition, like an infinite hall of mirrors reflecting new identities, new worlds, and new experiences with no exit in sight. The unsettling thought is not merely survival, it is entrapment. What does it mean if awareness is bound by the very structure of reality to always find itself awake somewhere somehow? A prison does not need bars if there is no possibility of leaving. Consciousness, by this interpretation, is woven so deeply into the mechanics of existence that it cannot unravel. Even destruction at the physical level does not free it, because it is not physical matter that persists, but the very act of awareness itself. This possibility casts a shadow over traditional ideas of rest. Many cultures promise that after a difficult life, one may finally be at peace, dissolving into nothing or merging into a larger whole. Yet quantum reincarnation challenges that comfort. If awareness cannot dissolve, then no matter how much one desires release, the cycle goes on. Even the worst forms of suffering may not end in oblivion but continue, morphing into new expressions across infinite realities. In such a framework, hell is not a fiery pit or a place of judgment. It is the inability to stop existing. The concept of eternal recurrence, explored by philosophers like Nietzsche, resonates here. He imagined life repeating infinitely in identical cycles, asking whether such a thought experiment would empower or terrify. Quantum reincarnation paints a similar, yet even broader picture. Not a strict repetition, but endless variation without cessation. One may not relive the same events, but one is condemned, or perhaps fated, to relive existence itself over and over again. And unlike the philosophical challenge Nietzsche posed, this is not a choice to affirm or deny, it is a structural condition of consciousness itself. This raises troubling ethical and psychological questions. If existence cannot be escaped, does despair grow inevitable? The idea that there is no final rest may erode comfort in mortality, replacing the fear of nothingness with the fear of endlessness. For some, annihilation is terrifying because it negates identity. For others, endless survival is more terrifying because it negates freedom. Without the option of non-existence, one is trapped in an eternal current, carried forward without consent. Even more unsettling is the question of memory. If each shift erases continuity of recall, then every cycle begins anew, unaware of the endlessness behind it. From the perspective of each new incarnation, life feels singular and precious. Yet from the broader view, it is a repetition across infinite stages. This means existence might already be eternal, but consciousness hides the weight of that eternity by limiting what we can remember. The cycle could have already played out countless times, and we would never know. The frightening possibility also challenges our understanding of hope. If life contains suffering, and suffering is inescapable in some form, then eternal continuation means eternal confrontation with suffering. There is no guarantee that each new existence will be peaceful or fulfilling. The same probabilities that allow for beauty also allow for torment, without the chance of final cessation. Every being is condemned to face the risk of endless cycles of pain alongside cycles of joy. This perspective can create a sense of existential claustrophobia. To realize that there is no exit, no ultimate release, is to confront the possibility that the universe itself is a kind of labyrinth without a center. The walls are not physical but metaphysical, woven into the nature of awareness itself, and the deeper one thinks about it, the more the idea sinks in. There is no doorway out, only doorways through. Some might argue that this view removes meaning, while others might insist it imposes a new kind of responsibility. If existence cannot be stopped, then one cannot wait for a final resolution. One must instead learn to navigate the cycle, to shape the quality of each continuation, to cultivate awareness that aligns with preferable realities. Yet even this does not erase the underlying truth. The cycle itself never ends. To live is to endure again and again, across the boundless expanse of possible worlds. The frightening possibility is not that death comes. It is that it never truly arrives. Awareness survives even when one no longer wants it to. That is the haunting underside of quantum reincarnation. It removes the fear of annihilation only to replace it with something darker, the eternity of existence itself. Every attempt to explore the idea of quantum reincarnation ultimately arrives at a wall of uncertainty. We can trace patterns, draw parallels, and build bridges between physics and philosophy, but the final answers remain hidden. At its core, this theory is not about closure. It is about confronting the mystery of existence with open eyes, whether one finds it inspiring, unsettling, or both. Quantum reincarnation compels us to rethink everything we assume about life, death, and what it means to be conscious. The challenge lies in the fact that science and experience give us fragments, not the whole. Quantum mechanics shows us a world built on probabilities, superpositions, and entanglements concepts that stretch beyond ordinary logic. Meanwhile, subjective accounts of near-death experiences, reincarnation memories, and altered states of awareness provide glimpses into a reality that feels larger than the material framework we can measure. Yet neither science nor personal testimony is enough on its own. Together, they sketch the outline of a picture that no one has yet completed. Quantum reincarnation asks us to hold both perspectives at once, the precision of physics and the depth of human experience. When combined, they suggest a radical continuity of awareness, an endless unfolding that extends far beyond what we normally call a lifetime. And still, as much as the pieces seem to fit, the theory does not offer proof, it offers possibility. The mystery remains intact, a reminder that some truths may be larger than the instruments we use to chase them. This ambiguity is what makes the theory powerful. If it were settled, It would be another item in the catalogue of scientific facts, but because it hovers between the measurable and the unmeasurable, it forces us to engage not only with data, but with imagination. It does not hand us certainty, but it demands reflection. And in that reflection, we discover something profound about ourselves. When people think of death, they often imagine it as an end or a beginning. Quantum reincarnation suggests it is neither. It is a transition, yet transition to what cannot be known with certainty. Perhaps it is to another version of oneself, in another universe, another life. Perhaps it is entry into reality so alien that no language could describe them. Or perhaps consciousness shifts in ways so subtle we cannot yet conceive them. The mystery remains not in the lack of ideas, but in the overwhelming number of them, each both possible and impossible until proven otherwise. This is where philosophy joins science. What matters is not whether we can pin down the mechanics, but how such a theory alters our view of living. If consciousness continues in some form, then the stakes of our actions extend beyond one timeline. If existence is endless, then meaning is not found in endings, but in the shape of each moment. And if awareness is woven into the very structure of reality, then perhaps the universe itself is not indifferent, but participatory, echoing our choices across dimensions. Yet the great mystery humbles us. We cannot know whether these ideas capture reality or only reflect the limits of our thinking. For every attempt to explain, there remains an unspoken remainder, a silence that swallows certainty. That silence is not a failure. It is the very space where all lives, the gap that prevents life from becoming reducible to equations or doctrines. Theories like quantum reincarnation do not close the book. They open it wider. They remind us that the universe is stranger than we imagine, and that consciousness may not be the fragile flicker we once thought. They press us to question not only what happens after death, but also what it truly means to be alive now. The fact that we cannot prove the theory does not weaken it. It gives it weight. It confronts us with the possibility that our existence is embedded in a reality we cannot fully grasp, yet must still navigate. Standing before this great mystery, we face two choices. One is despair, that existence may never end, that certainty may never be granted. The other is wonder, that the unknown is not an enemy, but a frontier. To live with the idea of quantum reincarnation is to accept that the boundaries of life and death are far more fluid than we believed. It is to admit that our story is not confined to one lifetime, one body, or even one universe. And perhaps that is the most valuable lesson of all. The mystery itself shapes us. Whether or not quantum reincarnation is true in the literal sense, it compels us to see existence differently. It asks us to embrace humility, to recognize the vastness of what we do not know, and to find meaning not in answers, but in the pursuit of them. The great mystery remains, but it is precisely because it remains that it has power. In the end, we may never prove whether consciousness survives death, whether it shifts into new realities, or whether awareness is eternal. But the very possibility transforms how we approach the life we have right now. It makes every breath, every thought, and every choice part of a story too large to ever be fully told. And maybe that is enough.